Managers of Reddit, what is the most unprofessional thing an employee has done that resulted in an immediate termination? I was a partner business, but wasn't involved in the day-to-day management or anything much anymore. Started another venture. I'm a big, rough-looking black guy, which is important for the story. I can't remember the reason, but I needed to sign some paperwork, and it had to happen within the hour. I think it had to do with a big client and some type of equity in their business in exchange for service. So I left the gym and drove straight to the office. I was showered and clean, but in casual clothing, jeans and a t-shirt. When I arrived, the receptionist said very loudly, "Can I help you?" There was already something off with her tone, but I didn't really care. I simply said, "Yes, I'd like to see Mr. Hampton. He's expecting me." I should have said my name, which she'd have maybe recognized, but I don't know why I didn't or she didn't ask. She didn't pull up a schedule, ask on the intercom, call his line or anything. She then laughed and said, "Mr. Hampton doesn't take walk-ins, sir." This alone wouldn't be a big deal, even though I think the laugh is rude. She then turned her chair away from me with her back facing me. I said, "Excuse me," and she put headphones in. There was one other guy waiting to see our office manager for a job as a courier, and he was kind of snickering and amused. It was embarrassing and unacceptable. I then raised my voice and said, "I need to see Mr. Hampton, and I'm going ahead." As I said, "He's expecting me." She just laughed, but wouldn't buzz me in. It's a set of office suites, and to get to what we call the bullpen, you have to be buzzed in. I don't know if she saw me through the glass, but the office manager ran up and buzzed me in and greeted me by name. The receptionist went white as a sheet. I could tell she was crafting bricks. I signed the papers and let my partner know what had happened. He walked out with me and just told her to pack her bags. Legitimately fired on the spot. When I look back, I feel kind of bad for her, but it was so ridiculous. There's no reason to treat anyone that way. A client could have turned up underdressed as well. Absolute madness. So mentor? Oh man. My high school buddy ended up being pretty successful in starting his own business. A girl who'd bullied him in middle school applied for a job at the 20-ish person business. I knew them both in high school. Their circles never overlapped, but she remained in her awful, judgmental ways. So she applied to this job and was meeting with the owner. My friend ended up getting to the front of the building the same time she did. He figured he'd give her a chance because people change yada yada. He's more optimistic than me. Well, she assumed he was applying for the job too, and made a comment about how he never really grew out of that middle school look. He didn't tell me more, but eventually his secretary filled me in. Apparently, he walked into his office and asked her to come in. She totally changed her tone and said, "Yes, I'm here for an interview." He told her the interview ended a minute ago. Story 2. I work HR department for a giant bank. Some of the branches are inside of grocery stores. A teller, on his break, would wander around the store with his cell phone and take photos of women up their skirts. He was caught and was wearing his name tag. Story 3. One of our delivery drivers was supposed to be training a new employee, basically driving around and introduce them to routes and customers and that type of thing. Well, he told the new driver to just drop him off at the park down the street, and when my boss drives the 15 seconds to the park, he was smoking weed with bums. Literally smoking weed with bums at the park. So of course the dude got fired. Then maybe a month later, we get a call from a customer saying that he was walking in the middle of a busy intersection with our company's shirt on. Story 4. I work in pizza delivery, and we had a guy back in the day, fellow manager, who tried to shut down the store 5 hours before the time that corporate set for us to close. He clocked every person out and sent them home, and then just refused to take the phone calls or anything like that. He was fired immediately after our boss found out, and he even tried to come into work the next day like everything was fine. Story 5 was going over security footage. Saw an employee that didn't want to sign their contract take it, sign it, stick it down the front of his pants and wipe it around on his junk, then stick it in the secretary's inbox. Contract was burned, inbox was disinfected, employee was fired. She was really sweet too, and kind of the office mom. Other managers and the owner saw the tape, and we were all kind of like, can we do more than just fire him? For legal reasons, we couldn't really without a lot of hassle. Decided just to get him off payroll and clean everything up and not tell her. Story 6. My husband is a manager and his employee somehow had another employee's ID and then stole that person's check and cashed it. Caught it all on camera. She still denied it. Story 7. I had an officer under me. He was reported in a tree. I went to investigate the last place he was seen. He was still there, attempting to pepper spray birds. I wish I could have made that up. Fired immediately. Story 8. Guy had a crush on a female coworker. He passed her a note at work one day with a gob of hand lotion inside it and the words, "I got really excited thinking about you earlier." Girl freaked out. Went to management. Guy got escorted out. Story 9. I had to send a guy to a remote gas, petroleum refinery site for an inspection. Previously, he had been reliable on most occasions. However, on this occasion, he never showed up for the pre-substances. Alcohol tests the day before he had to fly out and gave me a long-winded excuse, basically blaming his car troubles. At this point, I would have gone myself to site, however, I was just back from an operation, so I wasn't going anywhere. The director made the final decision to send him anyway, against my recommendations. We flew him to site to do his on-site induction, where he would do the substances and alcohol test anyway. Partway through his induction, he got up and left. I called him that night, but never got an answer. So I checked with his accommodation, and the hotel claimed he'd checked in within the last half hour. I was just glad nothing major had happened. Next morning, I speak to the client, and the client informs me that the staff member apologized for leaving abruptly and had to rush of and deal with some personal issues. I don't press it any longer. 2 hours goes by, and I get a call from the client stating that they've kicked him off site because they've found him asleep on site, and when they woke he became extremely aggressive. The client is furious about this and says, "We're a cowboy of an operation for sending someone like this and to fly someone up the next day to finish the job." That night, we have a conference call with the client stating that we're no longer going to be working for them due to this issue, costing our company roughly $1 million from the loss of the contract. We bring him the day after he flies back to ask about his actions. I'm supposed to head this up and get his side of the story, except before we even get into really discussing things, my director asks, "If we are to substances test you today, would you fail?" He answers yes, and he was told he's being terminated instantly. He starts yelling at the top of his lungs and blaming his actions on everyone else. I told him he needs to leave straight away or police will get called. He does. He leaves then for the next month. Our admin receive emails about how I'm terrible at my job, and I should be fired for not listening to his problems, which he had never spoken to me about. So, yeah, that was the day I fired my brother and found out he was addicted to meth. Story 10? Had an employee pass out in his truck in a customer's driveway. Customer called me to report, said employee had a glass pipe on his chest. Luckily, guy decides to call me instead of the sheriff. Employee was picked up and brought back to shop. When asked what was going on, he stated, "I was on break. It wasn't weed, it just substances." Sorry, bud. I don't think this is going to work out. Story 11. Rubbing a pregnant coworker's belly 3 times after being asked to stop and then asking her if her husband was good at the sex. I fired him, and he asked if we could still be friends. No. He then tried to file for unemployment after only working there for 3 weeks, part-time. Story 12. I'm not the manager involved, but I think this fits the bill. A coworker of mine who was a little bit too into his car got snapped doing twice the speed limit. Instead of pulling over for the patrol car behind him, he decided to run for it. He led a police chase to the office and shook them off by hiding in the underground parking. The GM watched it happen from his office. He took the lift down, found coworker's car, and told him not to bother getting out. Story 13. Not a manager, but worked as a bike courier. Had a coworker show up claiming he forgot where he locked his bicycle. Had to let him go. The problem was that he was an alcoholic. He would get himself clean when his money ran out, and then show up for work and convince them to hire him again. First paycheck, and the next day, he would show up without his bicycle or with a black eye. Started paying him on Fridays so he could sober up for Monday. Story 14. Supervisor in a call center. We worked with electronic transfer of benefits cards. All calls are recorded. All agents know this because we have them listen to enough of them on one-on-ones. This girl got in an argument with a caller and told him, "Maybe you should get a job and get off food stamps." That wasn't even the worst part of the call, just the part I can quote verbatim. There was also a rant accusing him of being personally responsible for the Atlantic trade. My manager was like, "It really can't be that bad." No, dude, listen to the call. She was fired. Story 15. In auto sales, one of our salesmen always seemed to be up to something. Between all lying to customers, substances abuse, and constant fighting at home, he was impossible to manage. Unfortunately, he was the type that gave the rest of us a bad name. Eventually, he got into it with our global system for mobile communications about several issues, and his go-to was to start making fun of our global system for mobile communications' handicapped son. I had so much respect for our global system for mobile communications. He took him in an office, told him he was terminated, and walked out, even though I know inside he was boiling with rage, glad he's gone. Story 16. Punching his supervisor and then making a run for it. He had permanent residence pending and wound up deported. Must have pretty bad anger management issues to throw your whole life away over not wanting to switch departments for a week. Story 17. I used to manage a restaurant. My hosts were in charge of taking to-go orders, but I couldn't have them away from the host stand to get them ready, so I had them grab a server that wasn't really busy and have them do it. On his second day, my host came to me and said, "I asked the new guy to grab the to-go order for me, and he told me that it's not his damn job. It was the end of the shift, and everyone was putting chairs up. So instead of singling him out, I just pulled everyone together and said, hey, if they ask you to get a to-go order, damn do it. They aren't asking you because they're lazy. They're asking you because I've told them to ask you." After my little speech, he turns around and starts slamming chairs around. "Nope, bye. You're gone. You don't get to cuss out my 17-year-old hostess, then slam crap around on your second day." Story 18. I once had an employee Snapchatting as he drove an ambulance with a crew member and patient in the back through an intersection during a red light. Story 19. I wasn't the manager, but watched the whole thing happen. A few years ago, I worked at a restaurant and we had kind of an annoying new hire. One of those, I'm too good for this types. It was this kid's first job and first day out of training. One of his tables was a family with 2 small children who were being obnoxious. But hey, it's a family restaurant, that's expected. While walking away from the table, he muttered something along the lines of, "Shut up your damn kids." Except he didn't actually mutter, he spoke at a normal volume. The mother overheard and was not pleased. He was sent home and invited to not return. Story 20. Had an employee pull a gun on me? This was after he was fired for threatening other at a Tier 1 help desk. Made everyone uncomfortable the entire time he was there. He's still in jail. It's been about 8 years now. Story 21. My construction company was building a new addition on a hospital. One morning, the president of the hospital called to inform me that he had just watched one of our laborers smoke substances in his truck while on break and went to the job site, talked to the kid. He said, "Yeah, I was, but I waited till break time. You aren't supposed to drive your personal vehicle to the job site for liability reasons." Oh yeah, and you're not supposed to smoke substances, even on break. We've had some winners over the years, but that kid took the cake. Story 22. I was part of a group of contractors together for a large international project. The client would get us apartments to live in at each implementation site for 12 months. A member of my team got into a disagreement with the technical director when he came to visit our site, which resulted in her screaming personal attacks at him in the hallway when he tried to step outside to de-escalate the argument. She was fired on the spot, but then proceeded to go back to the apartment provided by the company and completely wreck it. The site was in the middle of the desert, and she had opened all of the windows, doors, turned the AC on max, stopped all of the drains and turned the water on, threw red nail polish all over the bathroom. It was the most extreme breakdown in a professional environment I'd ever seen. I never learned of any follow-up. That is legal action. I think because the technical director was embarrassed, he had to ask us to check her apartment since he had already left town. While I did not fire her, I was offered the chance to work with her again 12 years later via anonymous reference and obviously rejected her as a candidate. Think twice about burning that bridge, or at least how you do it. Story 23. I gave my secretary a document that I wanted incorporated into a letter I had written, and she threw the document like a frisbee into her trash can. It was literally my only copy, so I had to walk over and fish it out. That was her last day. Story 24. She left behind incredibly bad, incredibly dirty, riddled supernatural fan fiction on my computer desktop. Of course she wrote herself in as a Mary Sue. Of course she used the phrase hot meat love wand. Of course she cried and blamed her autistic attention deficit hyperactivity disorder for writing about Dean and Sam Ducker. Of course she blasted me on her Tumblr. This merry little tale took place in 2013 at a research facility. Fanfiction writer was already on very thin ice for screaming at her boss, me, never finishing projects, and coming in late on multiple occasions, screwing up meetings. Getting on my computer while I was in a meeting and writing about being the lucky Pierre and a Dean and Sam Effie Tower was the last straw. My coworker found her Tumblr, which she put on her LinkedIn profile. She now works in a morgue in Texas. Story 25. Years back, a coworker got into some trouble for something and got called into the owner's office. Few minutes later, you hear a huge thump. Idiot broke his hand on the boss's desk during their disagreement. He got a police escort off the property. Story 26. Had an employee, a nurse, who was drinking on the job. Snuck vodka in a plastic water bottle. We became suspicious when she began behaving erratically. Then we noticed that the was super possessive of her bottle and never let it leave her sight or let anyone else near it. She messed up and left it at her desk when she went to the bathroom, so we sniffed it and she was busted. Hot mess that woman was. Story 27. Not a manager, but I think this is a relevant story. New hire who didn't seem too thrilled with the job. Called out at least 2 times in as many weeks, so the writing was already on the wall for him. Boss wanted to talk to him, essentially to ask, was he really happy here and did he really want to continue working? I didn't hear what specifically happened, but in the end, the new hire flipped off the boss and was promptly chased out by the manager and at least one other employee. Story 28. Had to fire a dish kid once. The cooks were dabbling with liquid substances and gave the kid some. He went out into the dining room, pulled an elderly woman out of her booth, and challenged her husband to arm wrestle. Story 29. I was a blacksmith at a federal historical site, and I used to make nails as a demonstration. I didn't see this, but another blacksmith was making nails, and a lady remarked, "They didn't have nails back then? 17th century. To which the blacksmith replied, "Right, lady, they scotch taped to everything where they needed the nails." Story 30. Had a guy that would ring up dine in orders with 5 sodas, the amount that the people ordered. But then before they cashed out, he'd remove all but 1 or 2 and would pocket the difference. He would give them the first copy, and since, of course, that's what they ordered, they never said anything. When he realized they would be paying cash, he'd change it. I realized it one day as he was fired. Story 31. Not a manager, but I was a higher-up over this high school kid. I worked at a golf course during the summer as a lead instructor for golf camps, and we just hired 2 high school guys to help out. Each day, I usually go through a small teaching session and then let them out the course to play. So I get through the lesson and send groups out to different holes. I told them I would watch over holes from 1 to 5, and they watch over from 6 to 9. So I gave them their own cart, big mistake on my end, to navigate quicker from hole to hole. Everything was going smooth until about an hour later, when one of the kids came up to me and said there were dirt trails all over 8 green. I take my cart over to inspect it, and sure enough, these kids were doing burnouts and drifting on the green. Now I'm irate and want to go confront these kids and get them out. I head back down the fairway towards hole 7 to find these guys, and crap you not. They are literally chasing a beaver around in their golf cart. A damn beaver, on a course with literally no ponds and water traps. How this beaver got there, I have no idea, but what I do know is that these 2 got fired immediately after that. We decided not to hire any more high school kids after this fiasco. Story 32. I own a tree removal service. Hired a guy as a ground worker. He worked great the first 2 weeks. Didn't complain, seemed to know the work, and I paid him well. The 3rd week working for me, we did a job that consisted of 2 big box elders to be removed. It was 95 degrees that day. I told all the guys that day, don't push yourselves too much. Make sure you're getting enough fluids, and if you need a break, take one. The new guy drove his own vehicle to the job as he needed to leave that day 40 minutes early to make it to a dentist appointment. We are like 40 minutes into the job. I notice he's moving really slow. Just looked really unmotivated and like he didn't want to be there. We had the customer's driveway blocked off with brush everywhere. At this point, I'm still climbing in the tree, and I see the new guy driving through the customer's yard, which was like 2 acres, and then onto the road in a serious hurry. I called him probably 30 times to make sure everything was all right. Didn't hear back from him. My other employees had no idea and were in shock. They saw him hop in his truck and just dart. He decided right then and there, damn this, and left. Still haven't heard from him to this day. I didn't terminate him. That's the closest I would have come to firing someone. Story 33. I wasn't the manager at the time, but I witnessed a good one. After a customer left the store, my coworker loudly called them a Jew, insinuating that they were cheap. They didn't go for her upsell. It was her 2nd day. Fired on the spot. Story 34. I managed a bowling center for about 10 years. I hired a kid who'd never had a job before, and he was a little on the odd side, but he seemed pretty smart, so I took a chance on him. About a month into his employment, a very large woman came in with her family. This kid couldn't believe how big she was. He kept insisting to everyone that it was a costume. That has to be a fat suit, he kept saying. He wouldn't give it up. He then decided to get the truth. He walked up to this poor woman in front of her entire family and asked her, "Are you really that fat, or is it just a costume?" I've never been so dumbfounded in my life. He was suspended immediately and terminated after the HR department investigation. The woman was so upset, she ended up getting some pretty hefty compensation from the hotel, which was much deserved. Story 35. Worked as a bartender at a restaurant. I was cashing out a waitress who decided to enter the bar to make herself a smoothie. After fumbling around, she dropped a wine glass from the hanger, and it smashed all over the counter. I told her she's going to need to clean that up before I can finish cashing her out. She then begged me that she needs her tips right now, as her friend who she owes money to is waiting outside, and that she was going to deliver the money, come back and clean it up. She never came back, and I had to replace all the ice and all the fruit garnishes on a busy weekend night because of broken bits of glass that landed all over. Of course, the manager comes over to ask why the drink tickets are 10 minutes long, and I told him what happened, who then immediately went into the schedule and gave all her future shifts away to others. The waitress called the restaurant not even 5 minutes later to ask why her shifts have been forcibly given away, and the manager replied, "'Cause you're fired," and hung up. Story 36. Had a new employee. On her 2nd shift, look at a mixed baby we were all smiling at from afar and say that was just so wrong. She went on to explain how horrible it is that there are so many white girls getting with black guys that it was nearly an epidemic. I just didn't understand yet because I'm new in town. Well, surprise, I'm mixed too. Her back paddling just made it worse. Story 37. One employee was dealing substances from the back door. Another was high and nodding off while standing over a fryer. Another went off on a, admittedly, rude customer and got real mean, "Your wife must be sorry she married you." One called me a ducker and spat at me when I confronted him about the fact that his dad came in to say hi to him when he was out of work because his dad had a heart attack and was in the hospital. And one just sat in the dining room and refused to go back to work because a hockey game was on TV. Restaurant management is fun. Story 38. I worked at a computer repair shop. This dude showed up to his first day of work, absolutely high as a kite and wearing no shirt. He had no explanation for why he didn't have a shirt. I told him to go home and not to come back. I wasn't even technically a manager. I was just the only one working that day besides him. So technically, I didn't have the authority to fire him, but damned if I didn't do it anyway. My theory is, he thought his shirt smelled like weed, so he threw it away on the way in. Story 39? Not a manager, but I had a teacher who was fired due to a spectacular display of poor judgment. I was in grade 5, so 10-year-olds. The teacher decided to reward some good behavior with a movie in class. We were given a choice between a movie about a family in the mountains and a movie about a ghost. We picked the family because we thought the ghost movie might be scary. It was The Shining. We watched it, unedited, in class. Some kids hid their faces through most of it. Most of us went home and had terrible nightmares, and the teacher was forcibly removed from class and fired the following morning. Interestingly, I encountered my story as an urban legend 20 years later, when I was completing my teaching degree. In case you're wondering, the movie about the ghost, it was Poltergeist. Story 40. Not a manager, but had to share. Worked at Jamba Juice. Coworker put bare hands into his pants and scratched his junk at the register while helping a guest. When the guest commented, he put his fingers in his face and said, "Smell it?" Story 41. Had a girl call in and say she was terribly sick. She's friends with me and the other 2 bosses on social media. An hour after calling out, she posts pics of herself at a local pool. Don't post that crap if your boss can see it. Story 42. I was terminated. Doing college on the GI Bill, I got a job working hospital security. This local hospital had been gobbled up by the growing medical center, and when it came on board, it had to decide whether to adopt the corporate policies or keep its own from when it was independent. I applied through the corporate HR department, not knowing any of this. The GI Bill was going to come up short, so I applied for the Employee Tuition Assistance Program. Unfortunately, when they choose policies, they picked whatever was cheapest and screwed their employees, IMO. The tuition assistance where I worked was a fraction of the corporate rate because they kept the old policy. Eric, it was $1,000 compared to $10,000. So now I'm about finished with my degree, but I have to work there for a year after I stop taking the money or pay it back. I'm kind of kicking myself because now that I have the degree, I can get a better job. But I would have to ransom myself, and it wasn't even for the higher rate. Then my wife finds me an adult pair of heelish. Yes, the kid's shoes with the skate wheel. It's actually her idea that I wear them to work because I do walk the ground so much inside and out. I kind of had a bad feeling about that, but she acted like if I didn't, then I must not like her gift. I wore them on a Sunday shift because not much goes on. It was glorious. Hospital hallways on heelish, brother. If you get the chance, do it. So I rollerbladed as a kid in the 90s. No shame in my game. In fact, I got my friend to pull me with a ski tow rope when we were old enough to drive. Rollerblades have this big, hard rubber brake, and I've taken some really big hills knowing it would stop me. Heelish have a chunky back made of rubber positioned roughly where that brake is. It is not a brake. I discovered this on a perimeter check when I decided to take a hill as if I were on rollerblades. I was quickly going way too fast and had a lot of hill left. I ditched 3 complete rolls, and miraculously only a scuffed pant leg and SCD radio. Also miraculously, I was just off camera when I fell. I wasn't fired immediately, but I was fired the first time my shift overlapped with the manager. I pretty much knew what was coming because I had worked a couple of evening shifts and knew he wanted to talk to me, so I looked up the tuition as assistance policy and was prepared. When the day came, he actually couldn't say the words. Looking back, I think he was actually worried I would flip out. During my time there, we had been called in to stand in an office next to where a termination was happening, so I knew the drill. Except now, they had to fire the guy they normally call to wrestle the detox patients into restraints. He was sweating and started to talk about the Sunday shift. I had to ask, "Do I still have a job here?" He said no, and I followed up with, "The tuition policy says this, and it looks like I only have to pay it back if I quit, not if I'm fired." He said that looked right, but he would have to check with HR. I shook his hand, said my goodbyes, and left. I did not have to pay it back. I got 2 part-time jobs immediately, which I built on, and am still in the same field today. I didn't try to get fired, but it worked out. Story 43. So I was young, and I was going with my uncle in his car. We found a beer distributor truck parked in the middle of the road. Literally, he was horizontally occupying both lanes. We waited, and when we saw they weren't planning to move, my uncle got put and gently told them to move so we could pass. They said yeah, but we waited another 5 minutes and they wouldn't move, so my uncle got out again and told to move, now more firmly. "Duck off, we are working. Don't you see? Go other way." And they laughed. Then my uncle calmly called his best friend, who actually was the manager of that distribution company. He told him the issue and the number of the truck, and then his friend immediately said sorry and hanged up. It seemed very rude. But then we saw that he called in the truck's radio and we heard everything. The manager was very angry and first told them to move, and then leave the truck there and go home. He fired them at the spot, over radio. Story 44. One of our warehouse workers was a young man about 25 years old. He was suspected of having a substances problem, mostly because of absenteeism, and that he just seemed off at times. One day, he called our office manager from the back parking lot of our building and said that he had an upset stomach and had pooped in his pants. She told him she would try to find a change of clothes to bring out to him, but before she could, he ran into the building and into the bathroom off the lobby, trailing poop smeared on his shoes onto the floor. He then took off the poop pants and left them in the bathroom and ran back outside to his car. At that point, everyone else in the small office was running outside to escape the horrible smell. Our office manager found a pair of pants in someone's locker and took them to where the guy was parked, but turned around when she saw him standing beside his car with no pants or underwear on. While everyone else was figuring out how to deal with the poop in the office, the guy got in his car and left. He showed back up 3 days as if nothing had happened. He was told to head on back home. I could never figure out why he ran inside. If you poop in your pants, wouldn't you just get in your car and drive home? Story 45. I hired a new server, and a few hours into his shift, he took a break. I get a phone call from the owner of the motel across the street a few minutes later. He apparently got into an argument with his girlfriend and beat her. The motel owner saw this and confronted him, and he pointed at his car and said he had a machete in there, and if she didn't mind her business, he would beat with knife her. Needless to say, he was fired on the spot. The next day, the convenience store across the street hired him. My wife was walking by, and he threatened her in front of his new co-workers. We know the owners well, called them, and he was again fired on the spot. Thankfully, we never saw the psycho again. Story 46. New chemical engineer on the job at a refinery. Doing great. Everyone liked him. A quick study. Already doing really great work at week 2. But then his transcripts caught up with him. Not a chemical engineer BS. In his defense, he did attend freshman year at the college he said he got his BS from on his resume. So, perp walk. With me. HR department guy. Security guy. Such an affable, smart kid. Too bad we had to fire him for lying about being an engineer. His business cards came after he left. Everyone in the office wanted one, just because we didn't have much drama in the office, except for Ben, the non-engineer engineer. Googled him now. He's gone dark. Pry changed his name and is eating faces of old enemies somewhere. I should watch my back and front of face. Story 47. I managed a warehouse. One of my recently promoted salaried leaders, used to be hourly, let the position get to his head, went up to a pregnant hourly associate and told her, "You're pregnant, right? That means I can duck you without a protect and don't have to worry about it." The complete and total delusion of this a whole to think this could ever be okay. I'm still floored. Needless to say, he was fired very quickly. Story 48. My first boss was telling some war stories. Here are the best ones, all much more interesting than mine. In the 90s, he worked for a phone company that purchased one of the first prepaid cell phone startups. This was a bad deal because it came with all their baggage, employees. From top to bottom was a total mess. Organized crime connections, money laundering, stolen goods, etc. The old manager, height 5 feet 3 inches and is 40 years old, fancy pants, was ducked several of the ladies. The ladies got extra perks for being his friend like extended time off, overtime pay when they did not work. It all fell apart when they learned about each other and got into a fight over him at work. Height 5 feet 3 inches was fired. Ladies on probation since they were afraid of losing jobs if they said no. After that, my boss was promoted and had to take over this mess. In 6 months, fired 18 people. One young guy had family connections and major anger management issues. Let's call him Am. Am was not logging into phones, taking 2-hour lunch breaks, etc. One day, a coworker gave him grief about slacking off, so Am walks away. He comes back with his heavy desk phone and goes behind the guy who was sitting in a chair and yanks him backwards, sending the poor guy sprawling onto the ground. Am proceeds to beat the guy with his desk phone, send him to the hospital. Obviously, Am arrested and fired. One of the ladies earned extra money during lunch breaks. Let's call her Trixie. She was giving her male coworkers a release in the bathroom for a donation. At the Christmas party, she got caught in the restaurant bathroom red-handed by one of the higher-ups. Trixie and her John were let go. Story 49. I was the manager at a local concrete plant. We hired a new yardman whose responsibilities were to drive the payloader and load the plant when needed, and keep the piles of sand and aggregate pushed up and clean. I trained him for a few hours on the machine. He had experience, but on a different style of loader, and then returned to my office. A while later, I look over the yard and see the loader sitting on top of the gravel pile at 45-degree angle, bucket full and raised, motionless. I called to him on the mobile radio and got no response. The piles were in the far back of the yard, and for the next few minutes I called again and again, but my calls were unanswered. Fearing a mechanical or worst-case scenario, a medical emergency, me and one of my dispatchers ran the 150 meters or so from the office through the yard to the loader, and there he is, on his cell phone. I climb the ladder and bang on the door, and he responds in a rather loud voice, "Hey, I'm on the phone." I immediately tell him to dump his bucket and come down off of the pile. At first he ignores me, But after a second request, he complies. But he is visibly aggravated. He proceeded to ask me what my damn problem was, to which I respond, "My problem is, as of right now, I need to hire someone to drive this ducking loader. Get off the property." He was very sour about it, and as the three of us walked back to the office, I radioed the owner, who had his termination slip ready when we got there. Story 50? Had to fire an employee within the first week. He, we thought jokingly, said was going on smoke break, mimicking the signs of smoking, came back 20 minutes later reeking of weed. Story 51. Fired a guy in his first week for browsing and downloading adult films at work on his lunch break, on a computer in a large open room that other people worked in, at a government organization. So caught him red-handed, warned him not to do that, already thinking this guy will be fired at the end of the day, but have to go through the channels, was a weekend shift. Then, 2 hours later, he does it again at the same place. At that point, I had the vice president approval to just fire him and we will deal with the paperwork on the Monday. Let him go. He's shocked, but doesn't say much. Being the only manager on site, I take screenshots of the sites he visited, forward it off to HR department and the vice president to document it all. A few days later, the guy's father calls the vice president to complain about his son being fired. Guy was in his mid-20 years old. Apparently, the fired employee never thought him being fired on the day he was busted for browsing adult films on a government computer in a government office was a reason to be fired. And he never told his irate father about this. So the vice president deals with this very diplomatically, saying employee was viewing inappropriate content at work, was warned, continued bad behavior. Father doesn't accept the explanation, so the vice president starts reading off the list of the sites that were visited. All of them were hardcore sites geared towards. The real kicker to this was that the vice president believed that the fired employee was listening in on his father's conversation via another phone. Just as the sites were being read off, there was a very audible click of that phone being hung up. Story 52. Had an employee offer substances to another employee at a really good rate per gram, and then proceed to tell him all about the health benefits and how it was a natural high. We investigated. Turns out this wasn't the first time he offered. Story 53. So I was a general manager at a Jimmy John's. It was lunch rush, and we had about 30 deliveries ready to go out the door. I look at the dispatch screen, the software used to route delivery drivers, and see that Frank, fake name, is up. I asked a coworker where he was, and he responded he saw him out front. I look through the front window, and this kid is weighing out a bag on his dashboard for his friend. Every customer in line, eating and walking in, could see this kid holding an ounce of weed in his hand. I ripped the deliver topper off his car, told him to give all of his delivery slips to a driver I was going to send out, and to never show up again. I felt bad because I know he needed the job, but at the same time, duck him for being such a git. I didn't call the cops on him, so he got off pretty easy. I watched my boss punch a delivery driver in the face on shift with customers in the store. They both went out for a beer after the shift was over. Jimmy John's is crazy. Next story! I was not a GM at the time because I had stepped down to go back to college. But I did witness this, and I gotta put it on here. There was this kid that I worked with, and he was hilarious, awesome, and fun to work with. He made us all laugh and was just an all-around good guy. Well, this kid was also an addict who would go to the Met clinic every day. So one day during the lunch rush, my manager asked me if I had seen Johnny Fake Name take any dollars and put them in his pocket. Johnny was on the register, laughing up a storm while making all the customers giggle. This guy was a real customer service-friendly cashier. Frazzled by the question of if I had seen him take money, I just kind of stopped what I was doing and watched him with my manager. After about 3 minutes, we saw him put multiple dollars into his pocket. We approached slowly and listened to what he was saying to customers. He was asking them if they would like to donate $1 to cancer research and then putting the money in his pocket. Well, after being pulled from the register, this conversation ensued, to the best of my recollection. Manager: why are you taking money for cancer research when you know we don't have a program like that? Johnny: well, I was going to donate the money after work to cancer research. Manager: really? Were you? Johnny: no. Johnny then hung his head, handed my manager the money, and walked out of the store, gone forever. Straight from a goddamn Seth Rogen movie. I miss him. Some of the jokes he told me I still tell to this day. I hope he is doing okay with his substance issues. Story 54. My dad's got a good story about getting fired. When he was in college, he worked at a Sears and was the guy who called over the PA system to let the customers know when the store was closing. So he decided he'd finally had enough of working at Sears, and on what he decided his last day was, he called through, "The store will be closing in 5 minutes, vacate the premises, or we will release the hounds." Story 55. Employee 1 wearing earplugs on a string. Employee 2 comes up behind one and decides to yank on string, which pulls earplugs out of ears very fast. This causes a vacuum in the ear canal and effectively pops your eardrums outward. It hurts bad. Employee 1 got mad, yelled, and possibly cussed Employee 2. Employee 2 decides he doesn't like attitude about the situation. Employee 2, who is an amateur boxer, punches one to lay him out on floor. Story 56. One employee was texting customers and taking money under the table. Came to our attention when the bill wasn't what the customer expected, so they came to us asking for a better deal. The texts the customer emailed us, to support their side and in the hope of a better deal, included the immortal line, "I got 2 guys watching me." We had to dig deeper to figure out how much of a pile we were stuck in, but he was gone that night. Story 57. Wasn't the manager at the time, but I work at a movie theater, and we, like most places, have a rewards program. You show your card to the box office cashier as you purchase your ticket, and as you cycle points, you get free drinks, popcorn, and eventually a free ticket. This one cashier, who seemed to always have tons of cash on her person, would take the guest free tickets and keep it. When the next guest would come and pay exact change, she would use the free ticket and pocket the cash. We do have cameras in the box office, so it was shocked she got away with it for so long. She got caught because a very regular guest asked to speak to our GM and was wondering why she isn't getting free tickets anymore. Fast forward a few days, the same guest comes back, but she can't stay for her movie. She had to leave and wanted a refund. Our GM goes down to handle it for her and notices the ticket was a free movie, so we can't give her a refund. She insisted she paid exact change to the cashier that was there a few hours ago. She reviews the footage and sure enough, exact change for a ticket. No coupon, but the cashier had in front of her and slides it sneakily to use. Manager greeted her in the break room and told her to take her stuff home. She no longer works here. Story 58. A father came to my restaurant with his daughter, and the cook wrote his phone number on the girl's burger wrapper. The girl ended up being 13 years old. Dad was pissed. Rightfully so. Cook got fired right then and there. Story 59. Not me, but someone I worked with had an employee throw a cup of tea in his face, in his office, sitting at his desk. He just looked at the dude, dripping tea, and said, "Get out." Story 60. One guy who was fired for calling in saying his mom was in the hospital. He posted on Facebook that he was going to a golf tournament. My district manager was good friends with his mother. What a guy, yeah? Story 61. My fiancé worked at a shady car dealership for a short time. He came home and told me this one car technician had borrowed a high-end sports car from the lot to take for a joyride. He then proceeded to flip the car, totaling it, and fled the scene, leaving his 3 Monster Energy drinks behind in the mangled car. Turns out he violated his probation by driving the vehicle and had to go back to jail. The shady-ass car dealership fired him, obviously. Story 62. In the 90s, my dad had to fire a guy who didn't know the company would know if he used his office computer for adult films. He was a software engineer for an aerospace company. When I met this guy before this incident, we discussed tattoos, and his advice was, don't do anything irreversible. Story 63. Used to manage a call center for a large corporation with a few stores that had retail counters. Corporate would require these guys to have a minimum phone time, or else you'd run the risk of being written up. The higher-ups, in their infinite wisdom, decide that hold time is just as good as actual talk time. So there was a lot of employees manipulating their phone times, like calling their own cell phones and putting themselves on hold. Wrote a few employees up for these actions. I don't blame them. I would have done the same thing. Anyways, we fire one employee for typical reasons. Disobedient, disrespectful, multiple warnings. Anyways, whenever we fire someone, we review all their company emails to make sure we take care of any unfinished deals, and we found an email string between him and another employee that worked on a retail counter showing off their long hold times with actual customers. They'd bag-mouth the customers saying how stupid they were. Some customers were waiting 20 minutes for help just so they can get their daily phone time up. Normally, I hated having to fire someone. That one was easy. Story 64. Not a manager, but I worked at the store and was friends with the junior manager who told me about it. It was a well-known clothing store. My friend D was closing up for the night along with another manager, P. As they were closing up, they were chatting. It was Friday night, so they were asking about weekend plans, etc. P said he was too broke to do anything. D took out one of the cash bags, went to grab something else for a second, came back and started doing the cash for the night. The store had this policy that I think is stupid. If they were under or over up to €100, they didn't question it. So as D is sorting out the cash for the night, P starts talking about his plans. D said, "Didn't you say you were broke?" P said something about cash. He forgot he had. D was suspicious, but kept quiet. The following day, P was off and D was in. He went to head manager and told him his suspicion that P had taken some of the cash. They checked the security camera for the previous night, and sure enough, in the split second D was away from the cash bag, EP came up and grabbed a €50 from it. They then checked footage and realized that this guy had been swiping €100 every night he closed the till. He varied it so it was never exactly the same, and kept it under the "something went wrong here" limit. The head manager called him to come in, said someone had called in sick and they needed him to cover. I guess he figured they were onto him and he never showed up. He was from a different country. I guess he went back home because he was never heard from again. They estimated he stole a serious amount of money because he worked at the company for several years and regularly closed the till. Story 65. I wasn't the manager, but I had a coworker going around telling the guys in our shop that he would lick the juices off my then-husband just to get a taste of me. Story 66. Had an employee come back from work on substances. They could hardly stand. I saw them drink out of 2 glasses and then try to take them to their table for the guests. I stopped him and brought him in the office. He then told me I was unprofessional and didn't deserve my job. Things quickly escalated. He left the office and walked into the restaurant. A random table asked him for a refill and he told them, "Damn you." The police got called and he was escorted out. He then passed out in his car, with the heat going on a warm spring day. Luckily, another employee noticed him while leaving. He said the windows of his car had started to build condensation on them and the guy was slumped over the wheel. 911 was called again. The guy could hardly put a sentence together until the police showed up again. He then somehow pulled it together as the police pulled up and he drove away after talking to the cops. A few months later, he was on an arrest site for possession of meth and had a few other charges. Story 67. Working at Pizza Hut, I had a new delivery driver out on a snowy day. Seemed to be doing fine. Then I get a call from one of his deliveries where he was supposed to deliver to the community center desk. What he did was call them from his car and tell them to come get their pizza. He didn't even get out of his car to hand it to them. Didn't even bother asking for his side. Story 68. Oh, I have a good one. Early on in my career, I was a manager in a big Fortune 500 company's call center. The building we were in was built in such a way that you had 3 floors, and in the middle of every floor there was a square hole which allowed you to look all the way down to the ground floor, with a big light well on top so the building was very bright. On the ground floor, there was a set of computers that everybody could use to do all their non-work related stuff, check email, Facebook, etc. One evening, I was working a late shift when one of the security guards comes over to me and asks me to come with him. So I follow him to the balcony and he points downwards. One of the guys who wasn't on my team directly but was part of the same language group I was a manager in was sitting behind one of the PCs in the middle of the floor watching adult film and giving himself the old inside the pants rub down. So I instantly started laughing at the absurdity of the situation, which caused him to turn around, which in turn caused his junk, in his hand, to pop out of his pants as he looks up with a deer caught in the headlight look. The absurdity of the situation was hilarious, but what made it even better is we escorted him out of the building and told him to come back the day after to come collect his things and his form to show termination of employment. When I told my manager later on, he went, "Oh, Dino was at it again, was he? Yeah, we've been trying to catch him for ages. He pleasured himself in the bathroom, but we never were able to catch him." Story 69. Retail manager. I had an employee that we hired for a seasonal position. She worked pretty well, but was kind of loud and obnoxious. She liked to sneak food to her cash register and eat between customers despite a couple of warnings. I thought I saw her with food at her register again, so I went to investigate. As I walked up on her, she had a full-on fast food meal sitting in an open drawer with a customer in front of her. She realized I was standing behind her and said, "What the heck are you looking at?" She was terminated on the spot. She even went as far as to purposely bump into me while leaving and started screaming that I hit her. She had announced that she was pregnant a week or so earlier, so of course that played into the drama. She said she was going to sue me for hitting her. She was damn nuts. Nothing ever came of it. She called the district manager later that week to complain about me. I had already sent the DM the camera footage, so he just politely told her to duck off, and we never heard from her again. Story 70. Used to work at a large fast food chain. Every 3 months, there is a big full-day, top-to-bottom examination of the entire shop by a company-appointed reviewer. We know they are coming at some point, but it's completely unannounced. It's kind of the point. If the company actually allowed enough money for these stores to follow through with head office's procedures, it would be fine, but they don't. So the stores always freak out when the person shows up. Anyway, the reviewer shows up, and an employee who we suspected was selling substances outside of company hours and some suspicion of during, walked into a cold room, grabbed something out of his pocket, and accidentally drops an acid tab onto his hand. Instead of hiding it back in his pocket, he decided to inject it. All this happened while that person was checking to make sure all the cameras were working properly. So it was all seen, lived by myself and this reviewer, fired on the spot called the Reviewer A. He ended up dealing substances full-time, got arrested for substances and fighting, narrowly escaped prison. This went on for a year or two, but then he turned his life around and now is starting to do outreach work telling his story to other at-risk youth. Story 71. Heard from a friend. It was during Chinese New Year. People get packet with money in it. Anyway, some managing director went during the weekend and saw an envelope on the table of one of his staff. He opened it, saw a $100 note. He swapped it with a 20. The girl remembered she had $100 in there. They checked the camera and caught the guy. He got fired for that, considering he was making crap ton of money. Horrible guy. Story 72. I was the director of a county history museum, and we had just installed a new security system with camera and motion detectors in each room. It also recorded when the 2 entry doors were locked and unlocked at start and end of the business day. One Monday morning, I checked the video replay from Sunday and watched in amazement as Martha, the weekend receptionist, and her boyfriend started making out at the front desk. They had to stop when the front door opened and several museum guests entered. Martha and Beau waited until the guests left, then went into the restroom to have sex. While they were busy in the bathroom, a visitor came in the main entrance, walked around several rooms, and left. Martha and her beau emerged 45 minutes later, then left for lunch, but cleverly left the entrance doors open. See, they knew. If I checked the security open and close log for the weekend, the museum still would appear open for visitors. They left the museum wide open, unattended, for another hour and a half when they returned from lunch. While they were out, several guests came in, viewed the exhibits, let their kids trash the children's discovery room, rummaged through the front desk, stole some bills out of the donation box, and left. We were very fortunate those guests didn't steal any art or artifacts or go upstairs into the office area. Of course, after seeing all this, I called Martha at home, told her what I had seen, and fired her. What really pissed me off is I liked Martha, and until that day I thought she was a solid, responsible employee. Story 73. I'll throw my worst one in anyway. I was supervising a tech support call center. One of the female techs walks up to me, face white as a ghost. I ask her what's wrong. She doesn't say a word, just gestures for me to follow her. I do. She points me around a corner of cubes. I find one of the agents with adult film on his screen, trousers down, hands busy. We did him a solid. Security escorted him out. They packed up his belongings wearing gloves. We told him we wouldn't press charges if we never heard from him again. I left a few months after that, but at least while I was there, nothing more was heard from him. I think for some reason he really wanted to lose his job and couldn't make himself quit or come up with a less lewd way to get himself fired. This particular call center wasn't shy about calling the cops either. Before I became a sup, a guy was arrested for cramming orders for extra commission. Ended up having to pay full restitution and 2 years probation on top of it. Loved bragging about hard work and dedication too. Story 74. Wasn't a manager per se, but the director of a summer camp. On the first day of camp, one of the campers in training to be a counselor, aka a volunteer hoping to be hired next year, punched a guy in the stomach because he was being annoying. The guy then threw up on the floor in front of everyone. Imagine being that kid. Ducked. He got fired real quick. Story 75. I'm not the manager, but my manager told me the only time he's ever immediately fired someone on the spot was when an employee casually brought a gun to work and was cleaning it in our very, very small back room, break room. Just sitting there cleaning the gun, not scheduled for a shift or anything. Story 76. Guy I worked with at a supermarket was caught stealing $5,000 from the ATM over the course of a month. Cool guy, though. Offered to take me to Hooters one time so I could see what a real pair of jugs looks like. Story 77. I'm not a manager, but I did watch my manager fire someone. So this place hired high school students, retail, and, well, someone in the high school take his life away. My coworker, who was 16 years old, used his death as an excuse to take off work to go to a party. When my manager found out, the minute the kid walked in the door, my manager approached him and told him to leave. Story 78. I work in a pub. Our manager left and they gave our assistant a temp promotion while deciding what to do. They recruited and sent us an assistant, which she had no input over whatsoever. On his first shift, he told the staff to just take whatever crisps and snacks they wanted to eat and he would sort it. He chilled standing at end of bar, drinking said juice and crisps for free while talking to customers about how he was going to whip the place into shape and sort all the staff out. Pretty much crap talked the entire place. As it's a complete regulars place, it really didn't take any longer than a few hours to get back to everyone. His next shift, he came in and was told promptly not to bother coming back. By all means, be keen to make changes. But don't be in a rise about everyone in a pub when they're all like family and this is their other home. Story 79. I run a theater company. I one time had hired a director who brought in her boyfriend, who had very little acting experience, for a show. While I was against this, I chose to let slide. What I did not let slide was when I unlocked the theater the next morning and found them ducking on set. I normally would have just warned them. For those who don't work in the industry, this is actually super commonplace in theaters, but usually people know how to be subtle, and had them meet with HR department. However, we were doing Annie, and there were 12 little girls standing directly behind me who witnessed this onstage activity. I ended up firing both of them, and we moved Annie to the next season. Story 80. Giving all the hot ladies in the Depths suite I love you cards on a third day on the job and nowhere near Valentine's Day. Literally, a select few was known for creepy behavior before at other places. Story 81. Not a manager, but reported someone and made a termination call. He decided to A. Get a scented candle. B. Light scented candle. C. Not having matches. Make a paper wick and light that. D. When little wick light thing gets out of control, shake it around a lot, and throw it into office trash, filled with paper. E, when that gets big, has the bright idea to douse it with scented alcohol-based aerosol. F, luckily someone had the bright mind of stamping it out, but office smelled like burnt lavender Febreze for a month. Story 82, not a manager, but when I was in a meeting with some people that came up from Netflix, super important meeting with super important people, one of the women from sales, who honestly didn't even need to be there, but she was often very pushy about getting into meetings and usually got her way, farted, and it stunk bad. It was a relatively small boardroom, and it got quite hot during the winter. Well, this normally unpleasant room was now filled with an extremely unpleasant odor, a scent that paints a picture of an abandoned old folks' home, where the trash bags of dirty diapers and moldy soft foods were left to sit and rot away with the building. It was a very obvious fart smell, to say the least, and we all heard it and knew who it came from. But, as mature adults in their place of work, obviously no one said anything, and the meeting continued, until the woman that farted, overwhelmed with embarrassment, interrupted the meeting in order to blame the fart on one of the Netflix people. It was super awkward, completely derailed the meeting, and I believe even legitimately angered both people from Netflix. She was fired before the Netflix people headed back to LA. Story 83 was a house manager for a men's ministry. We took people in typically right from jail or other situations where they needed to get back on their feet and back into society. We get a new guy sent to us that at first wanted to join in. He had the shortest time of anyone there at 3 days. Within those 3 days, he complained about the amount of work that was expected, despite signing paperwork that he'd be willing to do it, left food and dirty dishes in the living room, left a broken raw egg on the floor outside his room, stole food from someone else, passed out watching TV, sold his meds for booze money, and got drunk enough he slipped and fell, resulting in him going to the hospital. We told the people that were his counselors that he was just not going to fit in and had them pick up his stuff while he was in the hospital. Story 84. Waitress altered tips at Red Lobster. She greeted her table. "Hi, my name is White Trash, and I am a single-parent mom." Come to find out, she was tip-fixing, and it's a felony. The first time they arrested her at Red Lobster, and the boss let her back. The second time she was caught, she was terminated. She was smoking substances. Another lady made it through training, and her first shift was Saturday night. Right in the middle of the shift, she had about $700 in cash on her. She walked right out and went straight to the addict house. The cops were at her house waiting for her to arrive there with the substances and arrested her. Story 85. I wasn't a manager at this place, but replaced the guy who got fired. So my friend gets me this job at a good place as a cook, and after a week or two, he starts telling me about the guy they fired before me. He says that he only worked one day and came in high. He wasn't doing much work. So he's sitting there doing nothing, and one of the managers is trying to make a side of fried tomatoes, but they accidentally get taken, and he has to replace them a couple of times. So after finally getting this plate ready to go out, the new guy reaches over and grabs a fried tomato slice and eats it. This place was real strict about how many pieces of food make up a side, so the manager was going to have to fry another tomato slice. Fired on the spot. A few weeks later, he was arrested for pouring gasoline on his girlfriend and she passed away, so I guess it was a good thing they fired him. Story 86. White-collar professional about 5 years ago. He was upset because he believed he was treated unfairly. More later, he took a dump on my boss's desk and stuck a lit birthday candle in it during a staff meeting, with the all directors watching through the glass. So, yeah, fired, no words were spoken, just sort of automatic. I'm telling you though, from unzipped to crap to birthday candle was like 10 seconds. Oh, the best part. He came to work dressed as a woman that day and was claiming he was being discriminated because of his orientations. I thought he was a normal dude, and none of us had any idea. Nor would anyone have really cared. Story 87. I was a sous chef at an upscale restaurant in that historical tourist place in Virginia. Had a fry cook get pissed at a server who decided to bypass talking to me on Expo and talk directly to him, the fry cook. They proceed to argue about how hot the fries were that were sent out. And before I could calm the situation, he pulls up a basket of hot fries and slings the contents at the server. She had some minor burns, but fortunately his aim was crap, and most of the fries hit her waist area, covered by an apron. Fry cook was immediately sent home and later fired. I also think he was charged with some kind of assault, though I don't know what came of it. Story 88. Not a manager, but a coworker at my old job shot up while she was charting, and then fell asleep in a patient's room on night shift. She didn't wake up until hours later when the district therapist came into the room on morning shift. Story 89. Well, the restaurant I was an assistant manager of got raided by detectives from a nearby suburb. They took away a shift leader in handcuffs and searched every nook and cranny they could find. It turned out that he had committed murder. He might have gotten away with it, but he sat there not quite a week after the crime at a table in the restaurant and described the crime to the person he was sitting with. Someone overheard him and turned him into Crime Stoppers. I've often wondered if it was a customer or an employee that overheard that conversation. He is serving life in prison. So sad all around. Story 90. This happened to a friend of mine. He worked for a kitchen supplies company that sold large equipment for restaurants. He basically just checked out and didn't feel like doing much of anything after a certain point. Anyway, he was in sales, and part of his job requires him to fill out these reports when he made a sale or something like that. He realized pretty quickly that no one would ever check them, so he ended up filling them out exclusively with Grateful Dead lyrics. No one caught on for quite a while until he went up for a promotion. During the promo process, management checked all of his reports and noticed what was going on. They fired him on the spot. Story 91. My company is very liberal on alcohol consumption while on the clock or lunch breaks, but it does have its limits. Dude came back absolutely crap-faced from lunch and grabbed one of our receptionists out of her chair, lifted her up, and started spinning as if in ballet. The receptionist was screaming to put her down, and as he did, we promptly let him right through the door. Story 92. Caught on CCTV camera. Two guys working next to each other on an assembly line. Obvious banter going on between them, which goes a bit too far. One gets his body hit, who then gets up and uses a rubber mallet to bludgeon the attacker. Both were fired. Gross misconduct and lying. Both said it wasn't them, even though we had CCTV camera and witness statements from shift managers. Both guys were okay. Tripped to hospital for checkups, some time off work while investigation was ongoing, and then fired about a month later. Story 93. Dude came in very late and very high. I told him to leave and come back tomorrow, early and sober. He didn't like that idea, so he took a swing at me. Fell down. Fired. Story 94. I'm not a manager. This hotel I worked at there was this guy who worked as a houseman. Been there for 15 years, very dedicated, and was always pleasant with guests and coworkers. At a holiday work party, he was awarded Employee of the Year. 1 week later, he got fired. Apparently, he was caught stealing tips from housekeeping. I don't know if that's the low of lows, but I thought I would share.